What up, y'all? Right here, we dropping this knowledge on Saturn in Aquarius. You know, as Saturn transit through your houses in your chart, you're gonna, experience different energy. Boundaries and limitations. Boundaries and limitations aren't bad. We need boundaries and limitations to ensure that we have a strong foundation. This is part of the reason why I only give you guys reference books. Because when you put excess shit into your mind, it stops you from being able to get on point when and where you need to be on point at. So Saturn in Aquarius is working on our collective mind, because Aquarius is an air sign. It rules the thought process. And because Aquarius is at the end of the 12 signs, it rules the collective thought process. So when you're looking at Saturn in Aquarius retrograde as it travels through your natal chart, you're gonna look, the people who got Saturn transiting through their first house, so if you were born with Aquarius rising or Capricorn, late degrees of Capricorn, you got part of Aquarius in your first house. So the first house represents yourself, your physical self, how the world views you. If you have Saturn retrograde in Aquarius in your first house, you're really taking into account how you're perceived by the world, how your boundaries and your personal relationships affect you. The Saturn in Aquarius is also, helping you release the things from your mind that limit your ability to accept and embrace other people. Because the first house works on you personally. So Saturn in the first house may also limit how people view you in prejudicial ways. Because Saturn in Aquarius allows not only the person it's affecting, but when it's on the first house, it deals with how the world perceives you. So it allows other people to see you in a more humanitarian and innovative way. When you have Saturn retrograde in your first house, people are reflecting on how they perceive you, because the first house governs how people perceive you and your physical appearance and your physical body. So Saturn in Aquarius in the first house, you may find yourself losing weight because the first house rules the body. So if you have excessive weight and you're excessive, in your appearance, Saturn is going to put some restrictions on that. So if you have Aquarius rising and you're extra unique and out there with your look, Saturn is going to pull some of that in. Saturn is going to pull some of that in and place some boundaries on that uniqueness. And I would advise you not to fight it, because Saturn only removes the excess. If you don't need it, Saturn get rid of it. Whether it's in your personality, your pocketbook, your communication style, everything that's ruled by the houses, as Saturn go through those houses, if it's not needed for you and your progress, it's getting the fuck on. That's how Saturn works. And whether you want to release it or not, Saturn might not make you release it when it first hit that planet. But, 7 years down the line, 5 to 7 years, when that square hits, Saturn gonna bust you up. Saturn gonna bust you up about that same problem. Now we're gonna get into the second house. Saturn retrograde in the second house. You making a check on your values. Because the second house, it rule your self-worth. It rule your money, your movable goods. And most of all, it rules your value system. Because money is just a depiction of a value. So, and it rules your worth, your self-worth. So Saturn is going to check a lot of egos, and it's going to blow a lot of bankrolls up. Saturn in the second house, as long as you're not spending excessively, as long as you're not excessively connected to money itself, and like money rules you. If you are a person ruled by money and Saturn is in your second house retrograde, you probably going to lose a lot of your money. You probably going to see some financial hardships, because Saturn is teaching you that your value does not come from your movable possessions alone. The second house rules movable possessions. But Saturn comes through that second house to teach us that our value isn't based on our material possessions alone. We are a collective. So your value isn't just based on what you have, it's based on what you can contribute. But the second house rules our personal resources. Second house personal resources, Saturn, Aquarius, your mental resources, your ability to provide humanitarian aid and relate to the suffering of others. If you're a selfish individual, Saturn is going to check you if it's transiting through your second house. If you have been generous, and Saturn is transiting through your second house, Saturn is going to establish a foundation for you so you can be generous to more people. The universe will work with you when you live in your purpose. I tell you all the time, you don't have nothing to fear when you live in your purpose because you had the momentum of the universe behind you. When Saturn is going through the third house, retrograde. Retrograde always means that we're looking back on or reflecting upon. The third house deals with our mind state, our communication. Are your thought processes and the things that you accept, the relationships with your siblings in your community, are they too excessive? Do you say too much, more than is necessary? Do you think too much? Do you allow yourself to get distracted by your abstract thoughts and desires? Because Aquarius on the third house give a motherfucker a hell of a capacity for fantasizing and innovation and creativity, inventiveness. But Saturn retrograde comes to tell you how much of this inventiveness do you allow to distract you from your physical existence, and how much do you structure to create the innovation that you imagine. Saturn and Aquarius in your third house tell you stop being wasteful with your thoughts and inventiveness. Write down your creativity. Bring it in from the mental plane into the physical plane. Saturn is a taskmaster. It's demanding at times. But when you're on task, Saturn always ensures that Jupiter comes around and cashes you the fuck out. Saturn in the fourth house. There's a lot of people going find Saturn in the fourth house difficult. Because the fourth house, they say that's the house of endings and karma, from your family. The fourth house represents our father. How many of us have experienced the coldness and callousness of our father, or the absence of our father, or father figures in our life? How many of us carry the emotional and spiritual karma and trauma from our family making the same poor choices? Because we feel like that's what we have to do, because that's what we've learned and what we've been indoctrinated to. Saturn in Aquarius, retrograde, it gives you the opportunity, because a retrograde is an opportunity, man, to look back on things that you have done and that you have experienced and see how these things either have allowed you to build your foundation or have led to you creating a weak foundation through excessiveness or unnecessary limitations, self-limiting beliefs placed on you by your family. What you learned in your childhood. The fourth house is the bottom of your chart. That's your family roots. So Saturn in the fourth house transit in the fourth house, it begins to challenge everything that you thought was solid. It's a tough transit, Saturn in the fourth house. Because we have the flaw of being slaves to tradition. If a tradition doesn't suit your growth, it's excessive, and Saturn's going to demand that you let that shit go. Saturn in the 4th house is a hard journey for a lot of people because we cling to things that give us comfort instead of the things that give us growth. Saturn in the 5th house. You know, the 5th house rules our creativity. It rules our children. It rules our romantic relationships that are just booty call relationships. You know, the 5th house rules how we promote ourselves, our investments. Saturn in Aquarius in the 5th house. Again, Aquarius is a sign that, you know, humanitarianism and collectivism. Does the way that you promote yourself create excessiveness for you? Or is the appeared excessiveness that comes from with how you promote yourself and where you invest your time and resources create a strong foundation for you to move into the 6th house of service? Because the 6th house rules service. That's why the police and military, landlords, maids, they're ruled by the 6th house, because these are people that provide services to others. So how you market yourself in the 5th house determines what type of services you'll be able to provide for others. So if you have Aquarius on your 6th house, you know, your mentality, the retrograde is telling you, you know, how are you actually serving others? Are you allowing your personal boundaries, your personal biases to interfere with your ability to provide services and care for other human beings in a compassionate way? Aquarius is going to ask you to check that. Saturn in Aquarius retrograde. Are you allowing people to use you? Are you giving too much of yourself to your job and your employer? To where it creates a biased mindset within you about providing services to others. Saturn is going to let you know where you need to let go at work. As you move to the 7th house of relationships, partnerships, open enemies, advice. You know, because the 7th house, it rules friends that you take advice from, not friends that you go out to the club and hang with. That's the 11th house. So with Saturn in Aquarius, it kind of puts you in a position where you have to, you know, learn to trust other people and evaluate if you're giving people too much of your trust and not trusting your own ability to make good decisions for you, for yourself. You know, it rules our long-term relationships and marriages. Saturn Aquarius in the house of marriage, retrograde. Are you taking too much freedom in your relationship and your marriage? Or is your spouse taking too much freedom? Do you guys provide each other the collective support that you need so you can establish a firm foundation while maintaining freedom and individuality in your relationship? Because Aquarius on the 7th house demands that the partner and the individuals are allowed to remain individuals while working as a collective. That's the energy of Aquarius, to be able to work as an individual for the benefit of the collective. So if you have Aquarius on your 7th house, you're looking to see that you have that freedom. You're establishing that freedom to be who you are while working as a cohesive unit in a partnership. The 8th house, transformation, death, you know, other people's resources. Saturn traveling through that house. Sometimes you have to learn how to stick it out on your own if you've been using people too much. Saturn in your 8th house make you stop being able to use people if you use people too much. Because part of your human existence is to learn how to use your own power. The 8th house deal with the resources of others. So Saturn going through the 8th house is checking you. Are you overusing the resources of others? Are you exploiting them? Are you being excessive in turning to the people that you know that you can rely on for help, which inhibits you from growing as an individual? Is that what you're doing? If you're doing that, Saturn finna show you, it ain't nothing to cut that bitch off. They're gonna cut you off from the resources of others that hinder you from growing on a personal level. It's not punishment. It is persuasion necessary for you to embrace your own power, to establish your own foundation. But on the same time, Saturn in Aquarius in the 8th house allows you to gain resources from others in order for you to heal and transform, because the 8th house rules surgery and healing. Saturn in the 8th house in Aquarius also give you the intuition you need to tap into the spiritual realm. If you're an astrologer and Saturn's in the 8th house, it's going to help you with your intuition and learning about astrology, because Aquarius rules astrology. You know, you got the 9th house. The 9th house is the house of higher learning, higher education. But more importantly, the 9th house is the house of faith and belief. Saturn retrograde in your 9th house. Those self-limiting beliefs, that fear, that self-doubt, go check that ass. Saturn ain't gonna keep letting you not believe in yourself. It's gonna create the conditions where you forced to find your faith. And if you are excessively putting your faith in God or the gods or whatever, your higher power, instead of owning your own fucking divinity, Saturn in the 9th house is gonna kick your ass. Especially if it's squaring your rising sign or making a quincunx to your rising sign. You know, quincunx is 150 degrees from your rising sign. It's gonna create the discomfort that forces you to make adjustments in your belief system if Saturn is transiting through your 9th house. It's gonna help you establish that belief in the collective conscious, you know, and humanity's capacity to do what's right for ourselves and each other. Saturn in Aquarius is very helpful, you know. As it busts through the 10th house, the 10th house rules your place in the world. Have you been doing too much in the world and not enough on yourself? Saturn coming to check you. If you've been doing just enough to get by in your place in the world, whether your place in the world is a janitor, a president, or a guru, Saturn coming through that 10th house is going to make you get on your job, or it's going to get you out of that position. Believe that. Because the vested interest of Saturn in Aquarius is establishing a collective. It's about establishing a collective understanding that we all must coexist and grow within each other, grow individually to grow collectively. Saturn is going to take a lot of selfishness, I promise you, on the universal scale and the individual scale as it moves through the 10th house of people and nations. You're going to see a lot more altruism opening up, especially within people who Saturn is going through their 10th house. People, businesses, you know, countries. Saturn in Aquarius going through their 10th house or aspecting planets in the 10th house. That's why I tell you, in the United States, Saturn is in the 2nd house of values, and it's trining the natal Saturn in the 10th house of the country. Good shit is coming. Good shit is coming for this nation, man. But the people have to stay on point and not live in fear. Saturn allows you to have the necessary faith in the Aquarian, innovative, humanitarian, altruistic process. Saturn in Aquarius is a good thing that we really need it, man. We really need it. And it hasn't happened in about 30 years. So you look back 30 years ago at the good things that were happening, and you'll be able to kind of gauge some of the things that are going on by this transit of Saturn in Aquarius. That's why your Bible tell you it's nothing new under the sun. Because when the planets align, similar shit happens. So as we move into the 11th house, Saturn, you know, is in his ancient natural home, because Saturn is the ancient ruler of Aquarius. So the 11th house is a natural placement, because boundaries and limitations are what govern the collective. And the 11th house is the house of the collective. It's the house of wishes fulfilled, but it's the house of friends, hopes, wishes, the collectiveness, you know, but not friends that we rely on for advice, friends that we go out, hang out with, act a fool with, or socialize with, you know, kick the bobos with. That's 11th house friends. I wouldn't advise you to take advice from 11th house friends, unless you got the same ruler of the 11th house in the 7th house. Don't take advice from your 11th house friends, unless they become 7th house friends, trusted advisors. But, you know, when you got Saturn in the 11th house, you know, we learn how much of ourselves that we give to others. How much consideration can you give the wants and needs in others without losing your integrity as an individual? Because Saturn is about integrity too. How much can you tolerate of other people's individuality before you lose yourself? And that's a really, 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 really important thing that a lot of people are going to have to learn. How much can you assimilate into the collective without losing yourself? It's important to be part of the group. It's important to belong to the collective. And our Saturn transits as a whole throughout our life teach us to incorporate with the collective. But as Saturn transits through your 11th house, Saturn tells you to put limitations and boundaries on how much of the collective mindset you allow to restrict your individuality. Saturn in the 12th house is considered a bad house, the house of losses. But to me, Saturn is my favorite. You know, the 12th house is my favorite house, and Saturn is one of my favorite planets. You know, the 12th house is it's the house of secrets. It's the house of losses. It's the house of karma. That's all the bad shit they say about the 12th house. But in all actuality, the 12th house is the house of hidden power. It's a house of losses, but losses aren't always a bad thing. When you look to your 12th house and the ruler of your 12th house, that's how you figure out where you get rid of shit that you don't want in your life. The sign on your 12th house, planets in your 12th house, them are things that will help you get rid of people, places, and situations in your life that you no longer want. 12th house is a very magical house and very powerful house. So for Saturn to be transiting through your 12th house, just know all the collective bullshit from lifetimes, Saturn is removing that crap out of your subconscious. You know, Saturn pull all that bull crap out your subconscious, but Saturn traveling through your 12th house also pull up all the strength from your past lives. It help you, you know, get the useful information, because as it moves out of your 12th house and into your first house of personality and identity again, the transit from the 12th house brings you the things from your past life that will help you establishing your foundation in this life, your first house, how the world perceives you. Everything in your chart works together. I hope these short summaries that turn this to a really long video help you guys out with this Saturn retrograde. Again, check out the other videos, learn planetary magic so you can harness the power of Saturn to make your life what you want it to be.